Hello everyone, welcome to EDFGC5806. This week we're looking at diversity, equity and social inclusion in respect to policy and practice, and that's a theme that we're going to continue on with next week as well, where we will look at a case study as you would have seen in your readings. This week my intention is that we examine the pedagogical policy issues and dilemmas in very contemporary local, national and global contexts, and obviously we're looking at diversity, equity and social inclusion, and you should be able to give 3 examples of specific initiatives in schools that promote these diversity, equity and social inclusion by the end of this. As I said, we will do this over 2 weeks, so we're going to start kind of with a more theoretical or policy approach and then look more closely at practice. Having said that, I will give you some examples this week as well. So when we look at diversity then, it's the term that we use to cover a very broad range of groups within schools and society who bring different needs and backgrounds to their educational experience. And as we address diversity, policymakers are also seeking to address obviously the idea of equity and social justice in respect to all participants in society. School and social policies in Australia reflect this national value of inclusiveness, and it's important to keep in mind. Again, we go back to the Melbourne Declaration, as we do in so many things, which capture this national belief. And you've got here that as a nation, Australia values the central role of education in building a democratic, and here it comes, equitable and just society, a society that is prosperous, cohesive and culturally diverse, and that values Australia's Indigenous cultures as a key part of the nation's history, present and future. Global integration and international mobility have increased rapidly in the past decade, and as a consequence, new and exciting opportunities for Australians are emerging. This heightens the need to nurture an appreciation of and respect for social, cultural and religious diversity and a sense of global citizenship. When we're talking about particular groups that need, if you like, special support in order to have equity, we're looking at Indigenous Australians. As you're probably aware, they're pretty depressing figures if we're looking at life expectancy, socioeconomic aspects and so on for Indigenous Australia. So for these reasons, this is a group that really that programs need to be put in place to promote equity, to make sure that they actually have the same opportunities and as mainstream Australia, if you like. People with a disability, and I know that that's a term that some people feel quite strongly both for and against. That's the term I'm using here, and it's what Churchill, in a book that you probably have, is using as well. But just be aware that this is a term that some people feel quite strongly about and prefer the need, for example, special needs as a term. People with low levels of literacy and numeracy, again, is a group that needs to be considered in particular from an equity perspective. People who live in poor socioeconomic conditions, low levels of formal attainment, correctional services, women seeking to re-enter the workforce, displaced workers and older men in rural and regional towns. In respect to disability, as I said, we're going to try to keep this current, and in fact yesterday the Department of Education in Victoria came out with this rather encouraging tweet that the special needs education has been announced. If you follow the hyperlink, or that bit.ly if you're on Twitter link, you will find a lot more details of precisely what these $155 million entail. There's a whole range of different initiatives in respect to both building structures to make sure access and so on is good at schools, but also various programs for a whole range of students with special needs education. So current stuff, definitely. The idea is obviously to include people, again from an equity point of view, in education and in participation in society. Inclusion is the child's right to participate in the school's duty to accept the child. Exclusion is the multidimensional process of progressive social rupture, detaining groups and individuals in social relations and preventing them from full participation. And obviously, as you would have gathered from the Melbourne Declaration, it's an inclusion perspective that we're really looking at, and that kind of signifies modern policy in respect to these issues. Global policies, you've got a whole range there, and all those hyperlinks have been checked, so they should be up and running. But the policies that we've adopted in Australia in respect to diversity, equity and social inclusion fall into the wider global perspective that you see from human rights, from UNESCO, so UN Educational, don't even know what the acronym stands for, organisation. All those ideas are not something that's obviously unique to Australia, but a global value, really. So that's where we're coming from, if you like. A key role for teachers in inclusive schools is to develop a positive discourse around diversity, equity and social justice. And rather than adopting a deficit idea that there's something wrong, and that's where that disability kind of fits into that perspective, if you like, that means that it's something wrong with the student. Whereas if we're looking at it in a more inclusive perspective and in a more positive discourse, we're looking at, okay, how are schools not actually providing the opportunity that there's something wrong with the school, if you like, if not all students are able to achieve and the provisions are not made for everyone to actually be included. So if people feel that they're excluded, if that's the perception, well then that probably is the case, largely. That's what the literature informs us in this respect, which is important to keep in mind. And certainly when we're looking at, for example, case studies of schools, if you're looking at a local school in respect to the inclusivity examples that are manifested on the website, for example, keep that in mind and think, who is explicitly included? Are there people who left out? What is the school doing to actually make sure that everyone is welcome and included in that? You've got a whole host of resources that you can easily search. If you go through the Victorian Education website, there's a whole lot of teaching resources that are really quite interesting. You've also got alternative websites like the Catholic Education Office, and I'll provide two other links at the end of this slide, these slides, which again go to resources and which fit in with initiatives that are actually really quite helpful for mainstream educators as well to learn from practice or diverse practices. All schools have policies for discrimination and work within the legal framework of respecting diversity. So from a theoretical kind of paper exercise point of view, that's in place, but then the question is, how does that then translate into the practice that goes on? And that's where the resources fit in nicely. So resources for disability programs within schools are always quite limited, even despite this encouraging Twitter announcement. But students who qualify will have assistance in classrooms. And you can also find out more about those resources and the procedures for making sure that funds are sought for students who have additional needs. Indigenous students have access to additional resources as well to support their learning, and again you can look at the Department of Education's website to find out more about that. Two other examples, which are not departmental ones but have received a bit of press fairly recently. Good to Great Schools is an initiative aimed specifically at Aboriginal students. And you've got a hyperlink there. It's being rolled out both in North Queensland as well as in the Northern Territory. Very much focused on direct instruction and the research around that to, again, make sure that students achieve success at school. There's also a community aspect of this in respect to, again, an equity point of view. And you can look at the website. The hyperlink there goes to the community aspect, the 5C program. You can register with Good to Great Schools and you should be able to get access. In fact, I put my registration in yesterday and I still haven't got my password to access the resources, but you should be able to, so have a look. Positive Partnerships is another organisation with lots of good resources. I came across this when I was working as a teacher and as a coordinator for programs both of gifted and talented students as well as students that needed additional support. Positive Partnerships is part of Autism Australia's provision really for students with autism on the autism spectrum, and they have some excellent resources and readings and so on. They have webinars, they have online training modules that are for free. All you have to do is actually sign up. So I really recommend you hopping on there and having a look because they've got some fantastic resources for teachers. Those were the references that I've included today, and you've obviously got some hyperlinks as well. That's it. Thank you.